Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Collins Ubani, and today I'm going to show you guys how to validate a user's input using this login page here. We're going to be validating the input that the user enters. This is my code here. I have multiple scripts running at the same time, so I'm just going to briefly go through the scripts that are functioning on the login page. All right, so at the very top, I have added the session start variable. And this function is server-side script. This is PHP function, and it allows us to actually create session variables and also manipulate this data stored in the session variables. Now, I made a previous video about the different types of ways you can actually store data in a user's browser or device. So I'm going to be using session variables for this example. So I have my PHP code set up to check if the session email and the session active are available. And once these variables are set, then I want to assign those data to the local variable here called data. Else, if the session variables are not available or they are not set, then data is simply equal to nothing. All right. So let me go down to other parts of the login page where I have this small JavaScript code here to validate the email. And this code simply checks the user's input email pattern. So it looks out for the pattern of the email that the users entered. And if this pattern doesn't match our regex pattern here, it is ultimately going to display the border color of the input red, signaling that the input format has an error. Now I'm going to show you guys how this actually works on the login page. But just before we go into that, I'd like to quickly show you guys uh, the HTML code where we have the validate email function that is fired up when the user types information from their keypad or from whatever keyboard they're using. The function validate email is fired, and the function simply checks the input value and matches it with this regex. Now there's many JavaScript events you can listen for, and on key up, on key down simply has to do with when the user is using their keyboard and typing letters, alphabets, or whatever symbols. Now these are kind of the frequently used events that many websites listen for. The onChange event, the onClick event, onload event. You can just go to w3schools.com and check out the various events that you can listen for. So depending on your need, you're going to have to know which event to listen out for. Maybe you want to display a dynamic container onload of a page. Then you want to have to listen for the onload event. That way, when the browser loads the web page, then the function that has been assigned using the onload event will immediately fire off. All right. So back to our login system. I'm going to type in some keywords here. And as you can see, immediately the border is actually red. So this shows that this is an invalid email format. But as soon as I add the remaining of the email address, as you can see, the border is green, signaling a valid email address. You can then add a password. Now, this is just a basic validation where we tend to validate the pattern of the entered value by the user. So let's say the user tries something like this. As you can see, it still validates it as correct. However, there is no email domain with the name from .com. So our code actually checks for the email pattern. However, it does not validate the authenticity of the email address. So it checks for the pattern, but it doesn't verify if the entered email is in fact a legitimate email address. Now I'm going to add a code here that checks or that goes the extra mile to check the user's email and matches it with authentic, legitimate email domain names. For example, gmail.com, yahoo.com, and all of that. All right. So I've updated my code and I've added a few lines to further strengthen the validation process. This way, when a user enters an email address, we're going to actually match the entered values with popular authentic domain names that are out there. Yahoo.com, Outlook.com, Hotmail, iCloud.com. I'm sure there are more domain names that are out there, but these are basically the majority of domains that a lot of people have out there. So most times people have Yahoo or Gmail. So we're going to be using this set of values as a matching array to further check if the entered email by the user is in fact an authentic or valid email address. So what I've done is I have created an error container, and in this container I'm going to be displaying the error message for the user to in fact know that we are constantly validating the authenticity of the email address and therefore further strengthening the user experience for the user. So here is my error container that I have added to my HTML code, and this will simply display the error message. Now, to go further into our JavaScript code, I have created a variable called domain, and I have captured the email value that has been entered by the user, and I used a JavaScript method called split, and I've given it a pattern or value or as a delimiter to use in splitting the email value. So domain is going to be equal to the email entered by the user, but split at is a symbol I'm using as a delimiter, and I've targeted the array key value 1 because when you use the dot split method, it actually splits whatever value or variable you've passed into multiple value. So domain would actually have the value of the key array 1 once the email.value split using the at as a delimiter has been processed. Now remember our first code was to test the email pattern. Now inside of that condition, once the email pattern is valid, we want to further check if the entered email pattern is in fact a valid email domain name. So within that condition where you have the email.pattern test value is true, then we want to simply check the domain using our array of allowed domains. So this list is what we're going to be matching the entered email value that the user has pretty much typed, and we're going to be matching the value with our array of allowed domains. And the function I'm using is actually allowed domains.includes. So this JavaScript method simply searches an array for a matching value. Again, we split the email value that has been entered by the user at the at symbol, and we grab the end of the array from the split method. And the end, if this was 0, this would be the very first part of the email. So we want the second part, which holds the values of the domain name or the domain address, and that value is what we're going to be using to match our predefined domain names that we have created an array for. As soon as allowed domains.includes domain has a matching value, then we know that the email address is a valid domain address. Else, we want to simply display the email border red and also dynamically insert this error message inside of the error container using the inner HTML method. So this is the login page with the modified JavaScript function where we further validate the email authenticity and check if actually the email address does exist in a reputable email domain. All right, so as you can see, immediately the input for the email showing red, meaning this is an invalid email format. But as soon as we have the format correctly imputed and also a valid domain name, the input border displays green, showing the user that this is in fact a valid email address. Now let's say I misspelled this. Now our error message has dynamically displayed, urging the user to check the email address format. All right, so this is how you can quickly validate a user's input. Basically, any interface that uses form element, you can pretty much do a client-side validation before you actually pass data to your server-side script. This way, users sometimes they may be unknowingly typing these or making these errors. Your system should be user-friendly. That way, you can dynamically display error messages, boost interactions with your software, and further increase the user experience for your product. So this is how you can simply validate an email address. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can submit the form data after you have finished the validation using the onkey event. When the user eventually submits the form, we're actually parsing the input values to process login.php. And this is our script here in PHP where we are actually looking out for the values from the form, which is the user's email and also the user's password. For now, the code isn't active, but I'm just going to submit the form and to show you that we've been able to pass the information from our login input to process login.php. And here is where we can do a much more strict validation where you can send email messages to the email address for them to click a link to verify the account. This way, you're going to make sure that all of the emails are actually functional emails. This PHP script is going to validate the input data. All right, so let's submit this form. And what this PHP script does is that it captures the email and also the password, and we're simply setting the email as a session variable, and we're creating a session called active, and we're setting it to true. So this will be displayed here in our login page where we've accessed the email variable and also the active session variables, and we've created a local variable here to hold this data. So once we submit the form, you're going to be seeing the email address and also the session active, which by default will set it to true. So this is equivalent to 1. All right, so let's submit the form, and as you can see, I've submitted the form and it has created the variable, the session variables here, and the logged in is in fact set to true. So this way, you can track a user's movement from different web pages. So as a user navigates various pages on your site, the active is going to be set to true. And this way you can know that the user is in fact logged in. So at this point, I'm not doing any validation or any logic to further enhance my security for this PHP script. So in the next video, I'm going to show you guys how we can validate the email address using a strict email validation process using server-side scripting, and also how you can encrypt user's password before storing information in the database. As a web developer, you shouldn't store users' password in your database the way they've actually imputed it. You need to encrypt your password. And I am in php.net. This is the PHP manual, and this webpage talks about salt. And salt is a cryptographic way of encrypting user data. There's many password encryption hash functions like the MD5, the SHA-256, and SHA-512. These are just various ways you can encrypt information that are sensitive, and each one of them have levels to how their encryption algorithm functions. Some are easy to crack, whereas some require a lot more sophisticated tools. So you can go into php.net to check out some of these various password encryption functions. This will further help you strengthen your data security. All right, then. Thank you so much.